So Jack kind of gave a brief overview of iSWM. As Edith said before, we haven't changed anything in the iSWM program itself, the criteria manual or the technical manual. It's really the process for implementation that we're here to talk about today. We did want to give kind of a quick overview. iSWM's been around for almost 10 years now, and I think people are pretty familiar with it. But we do, if this overview wasn't enough information for you, the iSWM website contains both the documents as well as all the training that we've done over the past several years. So there's a wealth of information there for actual iSWM information. Again, we're going to be talking about a new iSWM implementation approach, but we thought it would be useful to kind of give you a little bit of history and how we've done it in the past and some of the reasons for that and how we've adapted over time and how we're looking to continue to adapt. So with that, the original iSWM manual, the iSWM design manual for site development, was released in 2006. It was a project that was started in the 2003 to 2004 timeframe. It was a big effort, 60 plus communities working together to develop that manual. Jack's presentation showed you kind of the meat of what's in there. It was a significant achievement for the region. In recognition of that, the iSWM implementation subcommittee and the Public Works Council, who were the committees that were involved in overseeing that effort, wanted to protect the investment that the cities that had participated had made in the document and the manual, as well as to set a threshold, if you will, for the implementation, so that if a city adopts iSWM, and they're recognized for having adopted iSWM, that there's some consistency and that it means something. So what the Public Works Council ultimately endorsed was that cities that wanted to use iSWM would have to adopt the actual iSWM design manual for site development. And if any of you were around back then, it was a pretty thick document. It's about the size of the iSWM technical manual, which is over there on the table. And you could add your own local criteria to customize it for your own particular city's needs. You had to execute a license agreement with COG, and there were some basic requirements in there. As part of that license agreement, you were agreeing that you would require developers to submit concept, preliminary, and final iSWM plans, and you would sit down with them basically and go over those plans. That you would encourage the use of integrated site design practices, the planning tools that Jack mentioned, so that you get the information to a developer early before they've committed a lot to engineering, so that if they see opportunities that they may be able to make some changes that would improve or lessen the downstream impacts. And then the final piece was to require that a downstream assessment be conducted for the 3 storm events: the string bank protection, the 1 or 2 year storm, the conveyance storm, the 5 or 10 year storm, and then the 100-year storm. So those were kind of the technical and policy requirements associated with adopting iSWM. And then typically cities, in order to execute that license agreement, would have to take that to their councils. There was a financial component to it as well. It was a significant financial effort to develop the iSWM products, and the committees at the time felt like cities that wanted to adopt the manual should have participated, and what they came up with was for 2 years during the development of the document, and the participation it's participation in the Regional Public Works Program. There wasn't a separate iSWM piece, but that iSWM was a component of the Regional Public Works Program. And cities are encouraged but not required to continue their participation in the Regional Public Works Program to, to help fund, updates to the manual, the training efforts, and other activities to support the document. We were very pleased with sort of the initial cities acceptance. There were 8 or so cities that adopted iSWM, that first iSWM manual in this time frame. Fort Worth, Grand Prairie, Benbrook, Roanoke, Southlake, Lakeside, North Lake, Mansfield. So there was a good group that over a few year time period adopted, went through the effort and adopted the iSWM manual. We had planned on doing updates to the manual every so often, and after the manual had been out for a couple of years, we reached out to the region to find out, how it was working, what the cities that both adopted it and others that were still considering and others that maybe hadn't, what was, how was it working for them? And we found that, that there were a lot of positive things said about the technical aspects of the iSWM manual, but it was found to be, pretty cumbersome to adopt. That large manual was just a heavy lift, no pun intended, to kind of get your bearings with. And so through public meetings and contacts, we found out that folks felt that breaking the manual up into the iSWM criteria manual and the iSWM technical manual that Jack described was a better way to organize the manual. So the iSWM criteria manual is an 80-page or so document that a city can adopt as their basically their drainage ordinance, and then the iSWM technical manual is there for the details, the hydrology, hydraulics, the design of the stormwater controls, and others. So when that was a fairly significant effort to make that change, we also rolled in the iSWM or the construction manual at that time to combine construction and post-construction. But we didn't change the license agreements requirements at that time. So it was still the 3-step review process, the introduction of integrated site design concepts, and the downstream assessment. And we had a handful of cities that adopted the 2009 manual under those requirements. And the city of Benbrook updated their 2006 manual to the 2009. Dallas went through an extensive process of working with committees to develop an iSWM criteria manual for Dallas. They have took that to council and weren't quite ready to adopt that as this sole requirement for development in Dallas, but it is, council did take the action to make it available as a voluntary or an alternative set of design standards that can be used within the city of Dallas. Duncanville, Glen Heights, and University Park also adopted the iSWM criteria manual, and all these cities show up on the map over there. But again, there was hearing some resistance, some problems with the implementation, and we wanted to continue to evolve and to make things respond to what we were hearing and make it more flexible for cities to adopt the iSWM program. And so in 2011, again in response to some public input, we changed some of the requirements. The new requirements were that you had to adopt the iSWM criteria manual, or you could now use the language in the iSWM criteria manual in your own ordinances, or refer to the criteria manual as opposed to having to use the actual document. You still had to execute the license agreement. We came up with a system. Instead of those 3 set requirements that I mentioned before, We came up with a point system for evaluating implementation, and I'll go over that briefly here in just a minute. But we also, the Public Works Council, reduced the financial commitment from the 2-year commitment just to a 1-year commitment, essentially, that a city, when they adopt iSWM, would need to be a participant in the regional program, regional public works program at the time of adoption. And so that point system, we broke down the iSWM criteria into 8 elements and assigned points to those. And the city could go through and look at what aspects of the manual that they wanted to adopt or not, pick and choose. You can see that 3 water quality options. If the city didn't want to do water quality at all, if they had other components of their ordinance that addressed post-construction stormwater quality and they didn't want to use the iSWM approach, basically if they did everything else, they could still adopt iSWM. Competition for volume. Similarly, if they didn't want to do downstream assessment, there were still other ways to get to 70 points and be able to adopt iSWM. And so we have had a couple of cities in just a couple of years that we've been under this approach adopt iSWM, and that was Azle. Fort Worth also went through and updated their 2006 version to the 2009 and met their 70-point criteria, and then the city of Hearst as well. So here is kind of a timeline of the iSWM adoption. Kind of mentioned all these already, but we're happy with the amount of acceptance that iSWM has achieved in the region. We have the cities here that have adopted it in one way or another. We also have found that a lot of cities reference iSWM, whether they've adopted it or not. And we also have found that the consultant community is using it in a lot of their designs. So the green block on the region is a significant portion of the region, and there's also a widespread usage of the document in the region, and we're pleased about that. But we again want to continue to evolve and respond to what we're hearing from the region and come up with new approaches for how we might improve the implementation and recognition of cities that may be already doing a number of things that are called out in iSWM. So one of the efforts that we did in kind of leading up to what Leslie's going to get into in just a minute here was an outreach activity where we went out to and surveyed 20 cities in the Metroplex that had not adopted iSWM. We wanted to find out, what they were doing, for post-construction stormwater control, as well as find out what they found to be the roadblocks for implementing iSWM. And so we looked at the 90 or so MS4 cities that had to have post-construction requirements and broken them into populations and came up with a number of cities based and tried to do it representatively based on population. And the first exercise was to look at what the cities had submitted to the state in their stormwater management program for the first small MS4 permit that came out in 2007. And there were 6 of those 20 cities that had said that they would at least consider iSWM. iSWM was out, had been out for a couple of years at that time. So 6 cities said that they would look at iSWM for adoption. 9 communities said that they would adopt an entirely new ordinance for addressing post-construction stormwater quality, and 5 said that they would review their existing ordinances and make changes to meet the permit requirements as needed. So in several years later, when we did this, after the stormwater management programs were were put into place, and cities that had a few years to implement it. When we actually talked to them and looked at their ordinances, what we found was that one of the 6 cities that had said they would consider iSWM had actually adopted it. 10 cities had added new ordinances to their city that addressed water quality. And 11 basically reviewed their existing ordinances and found that no action was required. And that doesn't add up to 20. There was some overlap in some of the subcategories. But basically, the takeaway is that a significant number of the cities had looked at their ordinances and felt like they were already meeting the post-construction stormwater control requirements through either a landscape ordinance, a tree preservation ordinance, an open space preservation ordinance, and or a construction during construction controls. And so, again, one of the 6 said that they would adopt iSWM. 9 communities that adopted a separate ordinance that actually referenced iSWM for the design of stormwater controls. 7 said that they're still considering iSWM, and 5 said that they were using during construction stormwater controls, at least as part of their satisfying their post-construction stormwater control requirements under the permit. And so the other part of the question, why haven't you adopted iSWM? A significant portion said that that it was they were limited in their either staff resources or funding to go through the exercise of evaluating the iSWM manuals and incorporating them into their existing set of ordinances. Others said it was too strict and that it was a deterrent to a potential deterrent to development in the city. That if they increased the development requirements, that developers were likely to go to a neighboring jurisdiction where they hadn't adopted these more stringent requirements. Some felt like the 3-step, the concept, preliminary, and final review process was more than they had the time for or felt necessary. Some felt, I mentioned previously, a significant number felt like they were already meeting the intent of the MS4 permit requirements, and a few others felt like it was difficult to go through the actions necessary to achieve the council approval, either initially for iSWM or as we made changes to iSWM manuals, that they would have to go back to council. So out of that came several recommended changes. Some folks felt that a smaller version or a scaled version of iSWM for smaller cities would be of value, or that a separate ordinance that just covers water quality might be useful. Provide more guidance for redevelopment, provide a refresher course. Some people, weren't aware that we had updated the manual from the 2006 version to the 2009, and then to get more involvement from other departments. The cities that had been successful in adopting iSWM felt like the assistance of their planning and parks and other departments was important to having achieved their implementation of iSWM. So hopefully through this new implementation approach that Leslie will talk about, we've made it more flexible for cities to use iSWM. Basically, we removed the restrictions on its use so cities can use it, get familiar with it as much or as little as they see fit. And then at some point, if they want to be recognized for their level of iSWM implementation, then they can come to us and have a discussion, and that process can be evaluated. So without stealing too much of Leslie's thunder, I'll turn it over to her.